Um, it's Tuesday for me, so happy Tuesday. Um, also, I think even by the time you see this tomorrow, like you could still go outside and check, but the Lyrid meteor shower, it's the first meteor shower of spring, and it's going to be at its peak tonight, which is Tuesday night for me. But it's still going to be happening. It happens for like a few days, like these few days of time. So you could check outside tomorrow, especially if you live in a pretty clear area and you have a good access to looking at the sky. That could be pretty cool. Just spend some time outside watching some stars and stuff like that. Meteor shower. So if you do that, let me know. Or, I don't know, put a comment or something and let me know if you did that. Today we are continuing to zoom in on into the next level in our levels of ecology. So we're going to be talking about not penguins, well, sort of penguins, populations. And when I saw this picture of penguins when I opened Mr. Wang's PowerPoint, this picture of penguins reminds me of something I saw last night, because I was watching a docuseries about Antarctica and the North Pole and that area, and I saw this group of penguins that were hanging out, and they were in the water, swimming and trying to get some food, and then this one penguin got separated from its pack, and then these leopard seals found it, and they just started it looked like playing volleyball, but instead of a ball, it was a penguin, and they just kept bouncing this penguin in the water, off their heads, and headbutting this penguin around. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was saddening to watch, but circle of life is how it goes. But anyway, that's from this picture of penguins that I'm seeing flashbacks of that poor penguin. Okay, so with populations, we're talking about organisms that are the same species. So we're not talking about multiple species anymore. It's just one species living in one place. And when scientists are studying the population of a species, they are interested in, the population size, of course, but then also its density, like how concentrated is the species in a given area, and distribution, also known as dispersion. So on the right, we have 3 examples of different dispersions. The top one, with the wolves, it's a clumped dispersion. So wolves tend to travel in packs. So, you're not going to see them all spread out from each other. It's one pack will be together and another pack is somewhere else. And so that's kind of like a clumped dispersion. The middle picture, we see the penguins that are on a rock in Antarctica, probably breeding. And that is representative of a uniform dispersion, so they're all kind of just spread out uniformly like polka dots. And then the bottom picture, a field of dandelions, I'm assuming, and this is representing random dispersion. But actually, random dispersion is really, really rare in nature. It's usually, you don't really find randomness. The world is really not very random. The world is much more orderly than we normally think it is. And even in a field like this, where it sort of seems dandelions spring up randomly, just because their seeds kind of fly randomly and land randomly, but different patches of the field might be more receptive or more favorable for growing flowers in the first place, so it ends up not being really so random after all, just due to different abiotic factors are going to slightly favor growth in different areas, even in a plain flat field. Okay, so changes in population size are due to birth and immigration. Birth and immigration are going to increase the population size. Death and emigration are going to decrease the population size. So you can see in this picture, a bird family. Birth, adding to the family, and immigration, which we're familiar with a lot. And then emigration, which is the complete opposite of immigration, and then death, of course, is the opposite of birth. But we normally don't see populations, growing forever. So there are some factors that tend to limit population growth. Competition between species. Between organisms of the same species for resources such as food, mates, shelter, water. Oh no. Okay. Another siren. It's been happening pretty frequently on my street. Okay. Lately, it's like every day there's either a fire truck, an ambulance, or something that's like flying by my street. I don't know why. Okay. What was I saying? Oh yeah, competition. Competition can limit population growth. But then also, like, as the population gets more dense, so in a given area you have more organisms, like waste is going to build up and in more concentrated areas. And so, like, as you have a denser, more concentrated amount of waste, that just allows for more pathogens and disease to, start spreading or taking over the population. We're even seeing this right now about how, like, big cities, highly dense, urban areas are being hit the hardest with COVID-19, just because people are living in such proximity to each other. It's really easy to be passing a disease around. And then the other, another density-dependent factor. Oh, I see flashing lights already outside my window. Okay, I'm just gonna mute this temporarily. Okay, sorry about all this interruption. It's like I keep picking the wrong time to be recording or something. Okay, as density increases, density of a population increases, then it's just like more, organisms gathered together in one spot for their predator to find them and, prey on them. But then, there's also some factors that limit population growth that really have nothing to do with the density of the population, such as natural disasters. Like, a fire doesn't care how dense the population is. The fire will still, happen and, wipe out some of the population. Demography is a study of statistics of a population and kind of following how population changes over time, particularly birth and death rate. So life tables are a tool that are used to kind of track a population, from birth to death, and kind of keep track of how many organisms of that species survived each year, how many died each year, and then kind of just track in a chart how the populations change by birth and death. And then all this information in this life table can then be plotted into a survivorship curve that kind of shows, with each year of life for that species, how many species were left, how many survived with each increasing year. So this is a closer look at that life table, an example life table for ground squirrels. You can see on the very leftmost column, it's their age category, starting from birth until about 10 years old. And they're comparing females and males and kind of seeing if there's difference in how their population changes over time. And even visually, you can see that the male chart is a lot shorter than the female chart, and we can see that this is because if we look at the death rate, death rate column for both females and males, at each age category, the male death rate is always higher than the female death rate. So male ground squirrels have a higher death rate than females, so their population is going to decline faster. Another thing that researchers would really look into in studying populations is, since birth is a key factor in determining how populations increase, it just makes sense to study the different methodologies that different species use for giving birth to and reproducing to increase their population. So over time, species, depending on the environment that they live in, they have developed different adaptations and that have selected for different reproductive traits that kind of give the best chance of successful reproduction, basically. And the different life traits that that researchers focus on when investigating a species is like how early does the species start reproducing, how frequently does reproduction happen, and how big is the how many offspring are in one birth. So there's two methods of reproduction frequency that we'll mention. The first one is semoparity, which is, semo means, I think it's Latin for once. And then so it's basically like one big reproduction with a lot of offspring, and then that the mother just dies. So because she's already done her one reproduction. So a lot of plants might do this, where they store up all their energy and resources to give birth once, and they release a bajillion seeds, and then they die shortly after. The other end of the spectrum would be iteroparity. Itero is kind of like the word iterate, to do something over and over again. So these would be species that reproduce repeatedly, usually have a smaller number of offspring with each reproduction. And some factors that kind of help select for semoparative or iteroparative reproduction. Stability of the environment. If the environment is pretty unstable, that tends to favor semoparities. The species will just give birth once, have a lot of offspring, and hope that more offspring, there's better chance that maybe a few might survive if the environment is not very stable. In a stable environment where the mom might be able to have a chance to take care of her offspring, and that might favor iteroparative reproduction. And if there's pretty intense competition for resources, it might make more sense to have a smaller number of offspring multiple times, where the mom can take care of her offspring and help protect it and raise it so that it can survive amongst the competition for resources. But you don't get both. You don't get the best of both worlds. You can't have a species that has a lot of offspring multiple times and takes care of the offspring. That just if it's too many, that's when you're trying to it's when you're trying to maximize quality, price, and I don't know, whatever. When you're shopping, you generally the better quality, the higher the price. It's really difficult to find super high quality and low price at the same time. So with reproduction, there are trade-offs. It takes energy and effort to reproduce. It takes energy and effort to reproduce many offspring, or to take care of those offspring, and for the mom to even survive to be there to take care of her offspring. So she can't have it all. And so you have trade-offs, between having a lot of offspring and then not being there to take care of your offspring, or having fewer amounts of offspring, maybe multiple times, and being there to take care of your offspring. So this picture on the right, an experiment was done where, so these researchers, for this bird species, they kind of changed the brood size, basically the number of eggs that the parent birds would be, taken care of and have as their own children in their nest. And the bigger the brood size, the lower the survival rate of the parents, especially the males. Because as I said, like when you have more children, it takes more energy and effort to take care of those children, and then that's effort and energy that's being used, and then like the parents have less energy to take care of themselves and worry about their own survival. So there's always trade-offs, no free lunch. Okay, so this leads us to a population growth model, studying how populations grow over time. So the first model we're going to talk about is an exponential growth curve, which is a J curve, and it kind of represents really rapid growth with kind of no limit on resources. So like it's kind of an ideal scenario where there's an unlimited amount of food and water and shelter, and so the population can just keep growing forever, which really isn't the case. And when species that tend to exhibit this kind of exponential growth, these species tend to live in very unstable environments where like a disturbance in the habitat or natural disaster could easily or just like predation could easily like take out the population, or just changes in seasons or climate or something like that. Species that exhibit this exponential growth, they tend to be species that reproduce very quickly. They leave many offspring. They don't take care of their offspring, and they have a short lifespan. So a lot of insects tend to be like this, like mosquitoes, spiders. Logistical growth, S-curve, it takes into account the idea that there is a carrying capacity of the environment. Every environment has a limit for its resources because resources are finite and they don't, exist forever. And so the population of a species will slow down as it reaches the carrying capacity, and then like maybe stabilize at its carrying capacity. And so those types of species that will kind of stay at their carrying capacity limit and just be at a stable population size, they're called K-strategists, and they tend to live in a stable environment that's not changing too much, so their population size doesn't change too dramatically. And they tend to have fewer offspring and take care of those offspring, and that's why their population stays pretty stable. You don't have like a huge growths and dips and whatnot. It is possible sometimes that even though the carrying capacity is the limit for how many, what population environment can support, sometimes like if there's a sudden burst in population, and like a bunch of offspring was born suddenly, it takes a little bit of time for nature's negative feedback to kind of kick in, and then those resources to run out, and then the lack of resources to start negatively affecting the population and start decreasing the population. But usually if we see a really big spike, like a big overshoot above the carrying capacity, the stronger the overshoot, the stronger negative feedback is going to bring the population back below carrying capacity, and there will be a population crash, basically. An example of this was in your book you'll read about an elephant population in Africa in a park, like a national park. And the elephants were being hunted, and so their population was decreasing. But then park rangers, they they introduced some like legislature that protected the elephants from hunting, and so then the elephants were no longer being hunted, and then their population started to grow exponentially until they started basically eating all of the vegetation in that area, and they ran out of resources, and then their population started crashing because they ran out of resources. So then the park rangers had to like start trying to fix this problem by, I think they're introducing like birth control to the elephants or something like that. So yeah, the population, when you're above or below the carrying capacity, negative feedback loops kind of help to regulate that. Okay, so if you remember back when we were talking about life tables with those ground squirrels, I said that the information in a life table can be turned into a survivorship curve. So there are 3 different survivorship strategies. The squirrel is kind of like in the middle with a pretty like steady decline of population. And I know that I think like you don't see like units on this graph, but basically the y-axis is going to be like the population size, and then the x-axis is like years of life for that species. So the squirrel population kind of steadily declines over the squirrel's lifespan, but we see a blue and a red curve. So our strategists are going to be the blue curve, where you see kind of like a mussel or oyster thing. I think it's a mussel. And our strategists, they tend to have many offspring at one time, and the parents don't take care of the offspring. And what you see with this blue curve is that it dips down at the beginning, and then will like level out. And what that's representing is that at the very beginning of the offspring's life, there's a very low survival rate. There's a high infant death for our strategists. So it's pretty likely that the young will die, but if the young survive after the first few years or whatever, then they're more likely to survive until the rest of their lifespan. And this kind of makes sense when there's like, that's why our strategists will have a lot of offspring at one time, just to like increase the chances that maybe a few offspring are going to survive. And there's little to no parental care because, as we said, there are trade-offs. You can't have so many offspring and be taking care of them and trying to like make sure that they're all surviving at the same time, because everything takes effort and energy on the part of the parents, and mom and dad do not have unlimited resources of energy. K strategists, on the other hand, they represent the red curve with the man jogging. So K strategists are going to have few offspring, but they will take care of their offspring and to make sure they survive. And so that's why you see with the red curve that the population stays pretty stable for the first many years of the species' life, which is indicating that the species young survive, because the parents are taking care of they're taking care of their young, and they're able to take care of their young because they have a smaller amount of children. And only towards the end of their lifespan, then the population starts declining. The human population, though, is unique in that human population has been able to exceed their carrying capacity, and this is mainly due to like we're able to develop technologies that kind of fix the factors that would normally limit our population growth, like lack of food. We developed agricultural technology to be able to produce food faster and better and on a larger scale, so that we wouldn't run out of food. Or to combat disease, we developed medical technologies to fight disease and be able to recover from being sick. So that's why with all that development, that burst in technological development, sometime in after the Industrial Revolution, our population basically skyrocketed and started growing exponentially and has been ever since. And because we have this ability to develop new technologies to help us survive against these factors that would normally inhibit our population growth, our species has the strongest impact on the survivorship of other species, because the technology that we come up with and the ways that we ensure our own survival sometimes comes at the cost of other species' survival. Like if we take over land so that we can develop more farmland, more agriculture, so that we can grow food for ourselves, then we've taken out some other species' home, and that species who now lost its home may not survive because it lost its habitat, and it might have lost its food and source of water and whatnot. So our increasing population has actually had a pretty big impact on the rest of the world, the rest of the environment that is not comprised of humans, and other species populations. So the last thing we're going to talk about are these are called population pyramids, and they kind of chart the population size of different age groups. So the shape of the population pyramid can help us determine like what's happening with this country's population. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And what's going to happen later on? So population pyramids also help us predict what's going to happen with a country's population. So like we'll start with the left. In Afghanistan, it actually looks like a pyramid, right? So we have a very wide bottom of the pyramid, and then it gets really narrow at the top. So this is suggesting that there's a lot of youth, a lot of children that are not adults yet and not really in the work field yet. And so this is like when the population pyramid actually looks like a pyramid, it's representing like really rapid population growth, because when the populations that are right now children, as time goes on and they move into the middle zone that would be sometime above age 20, below age 40, then that population can give birth to have more children, and then it just keeps like expanding, right? Whereas if we look at the United States, it's kind of more like not a pyramid, but maybe like a skyscraper with like vertical walls. And so it's kind of just like pretty stable. It's just stable and maybe slowly growing. And we don't have like a large amount of like youth. There's a little bit of a bulge about middle age, based off of when this population pyramid was put together. The age group that's like 50s to 30s or whatever would have represented the baby boomers. So that's why there's like a little bit of a bulge in the population. And then if we go to Italy, we see that Italy shrinks at the very bottom of its pyramid. And that represents that there's less children than non-children. And so as time goes on, like each layer of the population pyramid will start kind of like moving up. So then Italy's population will be decreasing because there's a smaller amount of children. And even if those children continue to have a smaller amount of children, if those children continue to have less children, then the population just continues like decreasing as each age group like starts to move up the pyramid. And even like besides just like understanding, okay, what's happening in their population dynamics, seeing their population pyramid and the shape of it can help to predict what's going to be happening, you know, socially in that country. So if we look at Afghanistan, where there's a lot of rapid growth happening, at some point, the youth that are not in the work field yet are going to be in the work field yet, and there's so many of them that they're going to have to compete more for jobs. So unemployment might be an issue, because maybe Afghanistan doesn't have as many jobs, and they're not prepared for the number of, the increasing number of people entering the workforce. Whereas if we look at Italy, when when the part of the part of Italy's population pyramid that's like kind of bulging out, at some point that group of people, that age group, is going to reach, seniors level, and they're going to have to be supported by a smaller population. So a smaller population is going to have to be supporting, Social Security and Medicare and stuff like that, a larger group of, people. And so then you might have problems there with, Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and stuff like that. And so those are kind of like how population researchers can sort of like predict problems that might be coming up later, just based off of the population pyramids of countries. Okay, so that's it for chapter 52 for populations. You're almost done with your ecology unit. And my voice is tired because I've been talking a lot today, so, okay, so let me know again if you go watch that meteor shower, or if you're able to see it. I don't even think, I'm going to try looking tonight, but honestly, because there's so much light pollution where I live in this particular neighborhood, I really don't think I'm going to be able to see anything, unfortunately. But I'll keep an eye out for it. Maybe I'll just like sit in my car and stare out the moon roof or something. Okay. My friend says to have a nice Tuesday, my favorite day of the week. Stay safe. I hope you find something fun to do, learn something new. Even if it has nothing to do with school, I really encourage you just to learn something new for the sake of learning something new, because I don't know, it's just honestly like pretty gratifying just to like learn something that you never knew before, that's, even if it's like really silly. Actually, the sillier the better. It just feels really nice to like know this random silly thing that may never help you ever, but you just know it. So that's my unofficial homework to you. Okay, bye.